What is up, everybody? I'm NoLucksGiven, and today I'm going to be showing off the most fun deck that I have played with in high voltage mode. And in order to show this off properly, we're going to have to travel back in time a little bit to the last time high voltage mode was available, which was the end of last year in between Christmas and New Year's, and I was busy with the holidays, so I never got to put this footage out. But now that high voltage mode is back, I thought it would be a fun opportunity to do so and talk about this amazing deck. Unfortunately, the deck is no longer playable, and they've only made one real change to high voltage mode, the ban of Gambit, which is not why this deck isn't playable. The deck is still playable, it's just not going to be as good as it was before, and I'll talk about some changes that you have to potentially make to the deck at the end of this video. But for right now, I'm just going to focus on fun clips from when this deck was at its peak, and we're not actually talking about the deck that I am currently playing in the footage. We're talking about the deck that my opponent is currently playing in the footage, Cerebro 7. This game against Vash inspired me to try out Cerebro 7 myself, and it was a ton of fun in this game mode. Here my opponent is going to get me real good. They already got me with the Black Bolt, which was pretty nice, but now with priority on the final turn, I mean, I wouldn't expect to have to play around this play. I've got an insane play here: Onslaught, Wong, Gambit, and then Absorbing Man. Despite them discarding my Mystique, I'm still going to get to destroy everything that isn't in Wakanda. But unfortunately, by the end of this turn, everything is in Wakanda, as Legion is able to transform the other two locations. And this was such a sweet play from Cerebro 7, which I was not expecting, that I had to try it out myself. The deck has a lot of really cool things going for it. One is that you get to play Legion. You also get to play Black Bolt and Stature, which can mess with your opponent. But the other thing about it that was really cool and no longer is that Onslaught used to be a 7 power card. And that is why the deck does not necessarily work as well as it used to. But I will have some alternate options towards the end of this video. I'll talk about some ways that you still might be able to play Cerebro in high voltage mode. But this was the pinnacle of the deck's power, I think. Going Onslaught, Mystique on a Cerebro location puts all of your 7 power cards up to 19 power. Then I also get to Legion to transform all of the locations into Danger Room, just for a little bit more insurance. Doesn't really wind up mattering here, just wanted to show off that 19 power Onslaught Mystique Cerebro combo. Most of the most fun wins that I had with this deck do include Legion. It is just a really powerful card in high voltage mode, though I have not really seen too many people play Legion in this current iteration of high voltage mode, but it can win games just by itself, and the extra energy in high voltage mode allows you to be a little bit more flexible with playing it on the final turn and still making other plays, or playing it early to have some really good effects with that. So Legion was definitely an all-star. Most of these clips at the start of this video at least are going to include Legion. The deck also with Onslaught being able to just go over the top is a very important thing in high voltage mode. So also very cool. Here's another quick Legion clip where we drop it into Central Park to lock my opponent out of the final turn of the game. There are some other pretty cool 7s that you get to play. Black Bolt, Stature, that's a cool 7 power combo, but also Wiccan, which I think a lot of people recognize as a really powerful high voltage card, because you've got the flexibility to sometimes just slam it down on turn 1 without requiring any other setup, and that just giving you that extra energy while also being a 7 power card. It was a 7 power card, now Wiccan's a 6 power card. That's a little hint for what's to come towards the end of this video. But for now, another Legion clip. My opponent, I'm assuming, might potentially be looking to Arnim Zola this Black Panther here. And if we just turn every location into Gamma Lab, we will be able to beat a big Panther. This part actually could have been bad though. Leader to copy, if that copied all of my 7s and then I lost a Gamma Lab because of that, that would have been a little bit awkward for me, but luckily Hitmonkey being bigger than a 7 actually saved me there. One other 7 power card that is a staple in high voltage mode is Ebony Maw. You might have seen this card at the end of the previous clip, but this being a 1-cost 7 power card, along with Stature also sometimes being a 1-cost 7 power card, just gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of being able to dump a ton of power on the final turn. Though this game we are going to instead throw that Ebony Maw into a second Krakoa. I don't have the Cerebro this game, and sometimes recognizing when you're not supposed to go for the Cerebro strategy is also a part of this deck, and being able to put plus 14 power on the top card of my deck seemed like a pretty good reason to deviate. This might have been up against a bot too, but I don't know, still seemed like a sweet clip. This game, I decided to deviate and become a Cerebro 10 gamer, so this was kind of a weird setup, but with my opponent having an Ebony Maw out already, I can win Lake Hellas, and then I can also win Monster Island by Stegroning their monster out of there, and they're gonna win in the other Monster Island, the 3rd location, but they've got way too many points there, and I feel like I'm looking good. I am still gonna drop Cerebro on the final turn, because I can pump up a bunch of these 10s, which seems funny, and then just drop a bunch of 7s into the other locations seems good to me. I was not expecting how this game ultimately wound up shaking out though. This wound up being pretty silly as my opponent has Shang-Chi plus Arnim Zola to rid me of these monsters, which means I'm back to being a Cerebro 7 gamer again. I was briefly looking at playing Cerebro 10, but now we will be pumping up all of those 7s, and this does get a little bit contested in Monster Island because the Wolfsbane is only going to be a 5, so it won't get pumped up by the Cerebro and the Mystique, but still pumping up the Stegron and the Legion is enough to take me over the top in the center location, and then I've got 2 more 11 power cards to slam down in Monster Island. I've got a few more fun clips to show off. This game, my opponent has the turn 1 Wiccan. All I have is the turn 1 Cerebro, which unfortunately is going to go away because the second location is World Ship. So my opponent will have that extra 2 energy. I will not have the benefit of playing a Cerebro deck, and it's almost a little bit of a downside here because once I show my opponent a Black Bolt, I'm definitely going to play Black Bolt this turn, try to disrupt my opponent a little bit. My opponent should now know that I will be able to put exactly 28 points of power onto the board. They actually wind up full sending it here on turn 2, which is kind of crazy. They go for Baron Zemo into Groot, and then they Cosmo while also playing an Ebony Maw. And this is, I mean, I think pretty good for me. It is going to mean that my Hitmonkey's smaller and my Wolfsbane's smaller, but luckily I'm able to draw 2 other 7s and go over the top for 28 points on the final turn. I did also accidentally queue with this deck one time onto ranked post-infinite, so I'll show that game as well. I hang on to Ebony Maw over the first few turns, and then on turn 3 I've got to drop it, and I'm going to play it alongside a Cerebro. The jig is up here. We're going to have to let my opponent know what's what, but I'm not really expecting to win this game, so it's not a huge deal. I basically would have retreated at any point had my opponent snapped. They just haven't snapped yet, so I'm still playing. And we're actually gonna get a pretty nice setup here. You'll see in just a second. On turn 4, we wind up drawing our Mystique, And from here, I mean, we can just play Mystique this turn, copy the Cerebro, and that sets me up to play a turn 5 Legion into Central Park and potentially lock my opponent out of the final turn of the game. I showed that off earlier on in the video. Might be able to do it again here on the post-infinite ranked leaderboard, so that would be pretty sweet. Unfortunately, my opponent has some similar plans, playing a junk deck. They're going to, well, this is actually a really weird interaction. They try to Viper and give me the Titania because Carnage is bigger, so then they take the Titania back, and then I play Mystique, taking the Titania back once more. Sometimes, if you are playing Cerebro, having a Titania can be devastating if Titania is your biggest card, and then taking all of your Cerebro buffs. Don't have to worry about that here, though, because we got bigger cards than Titania, we got bigger fish to fry, and unfortunately, we are not going to be able to play that Legion into Central Park because my opponent locked me out of that location, but we can use this Legion to take out my opponent's Limbo. So this is actually looking really, really fantastic for me with a Legion. I told you, this card can just win games by itself. It can just steal cubes, and my opponent finally brings in that stab, and this time we are not retreating. I don't want to snap back though. I think that would tip my hand a little bit too much, so I'm just going to play the Legion, let it ride out, and I will take my 4 cubes here as we drop an 11 power Legion. We are going to get the hood from the first location, but that's not enough to overcome my 11 power Ebony Maw. Kind of just like a bonus clip here. We're winding down at this point, but I also tried out Bishop in the deck. That wasn't featured in any of the games up until this point in the video. That'll get me over the top of Hulk plus Surtur. And yeah, I do think it's really just satisfying having Bishop be a 7 power card. If we play the remainder of our cards here, we will get Bishop up to 7, and we will have Cerebro plus Mystique on Cerebro. So that alone, I think, is really neat. I did want to take some time also to discuss some ways that you might still be able to play Cerebro in high voltage mode today. And the first one, we're going to work down from Cerebro 8 to Cerebro 6, which you can see this deck also has a few 6 power cards in it. Onslaught, though, moving up to 8, I think this is the most restrictive build of the deck, and honestly, the best way to build it probably includes a lot of different potential lines that don't leave you going for Cerebro 8 in every game. And this deck could even potentially be improved with Living Tribunal. Wiccan, Serra might still want to be in this deck. I just kind of included a few different discussion points. The only real 8s that you have access to are Gladiator, which is a nice little 3/8, and Cannonball. Honestly, the curve of this deck is probably too expensive to really warrant, but you could potentially do some interesting stuff with Odin, retriggering White Tiger. That's a few 8s. So I also have Wong, Mystique, Onslaught. Those cards can all combo together in interesting ways. And then Iron Man. One other thing that is potential to think about. So you've got MODOK as an 8, and you could use MODOK to discard Khonshu and Iron Man. That would be really cool, but there's no real guarantee that that's going to work. Dazzler is actually probably, I just did like a real cursory look through 8s. I don't think 8s are really the strong option. I think that the better options are going to be Cerebro 6 and Cerebro 7. So just going down from 8 power to 7 power, and I didn't look that hard at other weird potential 8s, like Bishop could even potentially be an 8, right? So you could sneak him into the Cerebro 8 deck, though a lot of times he does wind up being a 7. The curve of this deck is much, much lower, though, as you can tell. The top end cards, Black Bolt and Stature, even Stature's actually a 1-cost card, so that's a lot cheaper. And then Anti-Venom, also one of the more expensive cards in the deck, is making another card free. So a lot of flexibility with that. I do think that Wolfsbane was probably the weakest card in the previous build. I do think that that is ultimately what I cut when I included Bishop. Now we can include the Anti-Venom Luke Cage combo, which also gives you a different way to play around locations like Sewer System and stuff like that. I do think this deck loses a lot of its oomph, a lot of its ability to go over the top without access to Onslaught. You could still sneak a Moonstone into this deck, though I think if you're looking to do that, then you might just still consider playing Cerebro 6, which we'll look at in just a moment. But without having Onslaught, the curve of this deck might actually be too low. So you might even want to consider playing some other cards that are actually a little bit higher in curve. Let me see if I can find any cards that I feel like would also be good inclusions. Not really, at least at the 7 slot. So I'm trying to think of what else that would even wind up being. I'm not sure. So this is still like a pretty good low ball deck and can put out a surprising amount of points. I think without the ability to go over the top though, it does lack a little bit, and that is where Cerebro 6 really gets to step in again with Moonstone, also Iron Lad. You saw I was playing both of these cards in the Cerebro 8 deck just because I've actually been playing this one and it's actually good, and there's a lot of ways to make this work. And honestly, I don't think that an Onslaught in this deck would be like totally out of line in some cases, just because that allows you to go Onslaught Iron Man in one location and then go Mystique on that Iron Man plus Moonstone in another location, and then you've got 4 Iron Men on the board, which is pretty good. Potentially more if you hit one with Iron Lad. Iron Lad is creating a sort of weird deck building restriction on me here. I do think it's a really powerful card and worth going for like this Ravona game plan, just because Mr. Fantastic plus Moonstone gives you like another angle to attack from when you are not playing into the Cerebro shenanigans of it all. You can see that the curve of this deck pretty low, and you get to play Wiccan, so it's pretty flexible. So Iron Lad, I mentioned there's a little bit of a deck building restriction. The first card I put into this deck was Cassandra Nova, because if you play Cassandra Nova on turn 2 in high voltage mode, it will have 6 power, barring some Vibranium or Subterraneous shenanigans. But because we are playing Iron Lad, I didn't want to include, like, there's no Star-Lord in this deck. Star-Lord would probably be better than Black Cat and Maximus. Not Lizard, interestingly enough. I'll talk about more of that in a second, but Iron Lad just meant that I wanted to make sure that nothing was going to be getting any additional power from its own ongoing ability or its own on reveal ability. So Iron Lad, I do think is just like really strong to include with Iron Man and Moonstone. Being able to double and triple dip on those effects can just be really strong, and it's one of the best 6 power cards, along with some of these other cards. So I mentioned Lizard, tease that a little bit. Maybe I will upload a short like tomorrow or something to kind of like tease this video as well. But Lizard's ability can be beneficial because we are playing so many ongoing abilities. We're a little bit vulnerable to a Super Scroll, and Lizard being copied by Super Scroll has been really sweet for me. And I saw that elsewhere. I think I saw it on like Reddit or a clip on Discord or something, and was able to pull it off myself in one game. So I was pretty happy about that. Just avoid putting Lizard into your Moonstone location. Try to have Lizard like in the 3rd location where you don't think your opponent is going to play to, or just slam it down on the final turn so it's less predictable. One other cool aspect about this deck is we play both Luna Snow and Wiccan, which actually winds up feeling like a similar problem to the other deck that I just showcased, the Cerebro 7. Sometimes we have too much energy and not enough things to spend it on because the curve of this deck is so low. I think that Ravona is potentially not needed in this deck, but also sometimes she's been really good and allows me to just attack from a different angle when I don't have Luna Snow and Wiccan. One other thing that I would love to do with Luna Snow, because there's a lot of Arnim Zola in this game mode, is use Luna Snow to have a 50-50 at disrupting and opposing Arnim Zola. That just seems really sweet to me, but it's also just pretty cool to play with both Luna Snow and Wiccan. And that is gonna wrap it up for me today. Hopefully y'all had fun. Mostly this was just a silly look at something that I never got to showcase in time, because with the little OTA changes, every OTA change, Cerebro enjoyers always joke that it's a buff or a nerf or both to Cerebro, every change that happens. So Wiccan, huge buff to Cerebro 6, huge nerf to Cerebro 7. That is going to be it for me today. Thank you guys very much for watching. I'm NoLucksGiven. Peace.